Five. Mm-mm-mm-mm. All right. It's Monday, April 4th, 2022. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geek Nights. Tonight, we are talking about hosting. Not just web, but all kinds of hosting in the year 2022. Because this is technically a repeat. We did a show on hosting on Monday, May 1st, 2006.
Yeah, a lot has changed since then, so therefore this is a different show. I don't even know what we talked about in 2006, but
So here's the show notes. Tonight on Geek Nights, we consider internet hosting. Full stop. In the news, Linux's new wireless stack and the Apple virus that wasn't.
Okay.
Linux's new wireless stack. 2006 was an era when we were still rocking some Linux on the desktop. That's a very Geek Nights news that I could not care less what wireless stacks exist for Linux, because it's not like I would run Linux on anything but a server anymore.
Or an Android phone.
I don't have an Android phone.
Me either, but you need some wireless stacks for your Android phone.
Yep, but I buy my Android phone from a hardware manufacturer or a company that has hardware and software already sorted out.
Yeah, but it's the point is all those radios are going to be, supported by whatever kernels in that phone.
That is true. But yeah, I guess there was a new wireless stack for Linux in 2006 around May, and I guess we thought it was notable.
Anyway, so we got some opening bit.
Yeah, you remember, we had a long hiatus, so you'd think, there's a lot going on. Remember, Scott must have a lot to say.
We blew our entire load the last episode. Now we don't have any opening bit left.
We're like internet goldfish. No matter how much time passes, the next time we do a Geek Nights, whatever happened to us most recently is what comes out of our mouths. Everything else is just deleted. It's like a rolling buffer.
Exactly. So I guess lately I've been trying, I'm not trying hard to get a different job because my job is still pretty terrific. I'm not running to leave, even though, but
yeah, I mean, mine's still pretty good other than giving me COVID.
I tell you, workers' comp. If I were to leave, now wouldn't be the worst time. So, and the market is ridiculous. So I'm investigating because it takes no effort whatsoever, basically, right? And even if I interview somewhere and don't take the job or don't get, accepted, it's still a learning experience. It's not a complete waste of time. What really, the interesting thing was recently I got so deep into an interview at one place that I only maybe would work. It's like maybe. If I didn't have a job already, I would work there immediately. But
yeah, that's such a different calculus. I've never been in a position where I didn't have a job and I was looking for one. Pretty much ever.
After the place that when I was a long time ago, when the place I worked.
I remember that the place that bought you that car to make you drive to that office that didn't have anything in it, right?
I quit that place. It was the place that I quit to from there.
Oh yeah. Okay, I'm remembering vaguely. That was Beacon times.
Yeah, the pre-Broadway job was the one that, they went under. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, even at RIT, I just had jobs.
Yeah, but I got to the phase of needing references, and you in the past, I've given references in the past, but I don't think anyone's ever called any references I've given in the past ever.
So just recently, for a bunch of partly because we're at that age where we both, like you and I are about the same age, and we know a lot of people who are a little younger than us, and a lot of them are starting to make career changes or like go to grad school or like jump into other things. So a surprising number of people over the last 4 or 5 months have been asking me to write recommendation letters for them for a variety of things. And for the first time ever, one of those entities actually called me and wanted to have a conversation. I have never in my life.
I also recommended a person for a thing and actually got a call.
Yeah, it was, of course, it was academia, so I feel like they're the people who do it. In terms of technology, no one's ever called me as a reference in my life.
Yep. I have been called as a reference one time, but in terms of me, getting called about me, I've not heard, right? But so this place wanted references, so I'm like, shit, who do I get references from?
Especially if you worked at a place long enough to where like, who do I know who remembers what the kind of work I do, who doesn't work where I currently am?
Exactly. I'm not going to give anyone I work with now. That would be awkward, right?
Yep.
And the people I worked with at my previous job, what was that, 4 years ago, right? It's like...
See, I had this cadence. My whole every 3-ish years, I'd change jobs, and that was a pretty good sweet spot of just ask the people who were at the previous job for a recommendation every time, and I just kept rolling that forward. But then I worked at one place for too long.
Yeah. So, but what was really interesting is like, I'm like, well, I don't really have much of a choice here other than, right? I'm not going to be like, no, sorry, I don't have any references.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went ahead and I contacted my boss who I haven't spoken to a previous job, who I haven't spoken to in 4 years. Just emailed him. And I finally realized like, oh, of course, the people who I did work with at my current job who already quit. Right, and went somewhere else. Those are the perfect people because I haven't talked to them in only 6 months or so, right? When they left late last year. And interestingly enough, I guess I'm not a piece of shit because every person I contacted, even the boss who I haven't spoken to in 4 years, they were just like so happy to hear from me.
Right?
They were like, even we didn't say a word to each other. Just like as soon as I left the job or they left the job, complete silence. Never spoke to these people at all. Right? And then I sent one email, just like, hey, how you doing? Small talk. Can I have a reference? Thanks.
Yep.
Bye. And they're like, oh, conversation. Right?
I just sort of weird, or I guess, because my weird orthogonal situation was, I just went to this conference in London. I hadn't been to these conferences in like 4 years. And a ton of people who knew me, who I haven't talked to since I quit my previous job, saw me there and were like, holy shit, it's Rim. What are you up to? None of them. People kept coming up to me.
That's what.
But they kept coming up to me having no idea where I was. They're like, you just disappeared. Meanwhile, they still had my contact info through multiple sources. None of that had changed. My LinkedIn was very clearly up to date. Most of them follow me on LinkedIn. Several of them follow me on social media.
Check their LinkedIn if they're not job hunting. Right?
These are the kinds of people who you'd think would be checking their LinkedIn, especially if they're bugging me about like, oh yeah, we should do some business together. Like, yeah, why don't you just contact me? Like you could have at any point over these last 4 years.
Right. Anyway, the point I want to make is that there's that certain awkwardness, forget the job reference part. There's a certain awkwardness to somebody you think about, and maybe you want to contact them for some reason. Maybe you like them, but you just haven't spoken to them in a long ass time. And so like, there's nothing to talk about because, the longer you go without talking to someone, the less it's like, what to even say to them. Like, what TV? You don't even know what TV show they're watching to talk about or anything, right?
Yeah.
Like,
especially with like people you work with who aren't like going to hit that critical mass of just longtime friendship to where
exactly. So it's awkward to contact them out of nowhere.
Hey there, Quagmire. What you doing?
Exactly. So therefore you don't contact them. So the time since you contacted them only grows and the awkwardness only grows. And you're imagining, right, that like, it's like, what is that awkwardness? Why is it, right? It's like, they're just feeling the same awkwardness, 99% chance.
Oh yeah.
Right. And they want to hear from you and contact you also, like 90% chance. So if you just say fucking something, just be like, hi, right? Just be like, I remember you exist. Right. I miss talking to you. You don't, right. What's up? How's your life doing?
Well, that's something during COVID that I've noticed, like just specifically these last few years, that a lot of people who I would talk to, the thing that rekindles that relationship has been meeting at a PAX every 3 to 6 months. And without that, there's a bunch of people I just haven't talked to in years, but we still like follow each other and reply to each other and do mutual crap on social media. We just don't talk directly except on semi-public social media. Just it's like a weird.
I'm talking about like the person. I guess with your nerdy people and your friends, you're gonna be on the social media that way. But like maybe a cousin and you didn't attend any family gatherings.
Yeah,
right? But they
yeah.
were a close-ish cousin, right? Or a coworker who was cool who quit the job that you're at.
The hardest part with family is there's the family who use more internet, and it's easier to just have those like light conversations versus the family that don't really internet at all.
Or the friend, the one friend who's not in the Discord for their own reasons.
Yep.
But still wants to talk to people, but has their reasons for not being on the social medias, right?
Yep.
Anyway. But yeah, it's every single person I contact, I think I got like 3 or 4 people, and every single one was like, oh.
Yeah, actually,
I guess the company's gonna call them to ask about me, and who knows what the fuck they're gonna say? Don't hire this piece of shit.
well, so the other thing that happens, because in my old
if they said bad things to the company that calls them, that would be a huge divergence for the emails they sent to me, which were very cordial.
So in my experience, like looking at these kinds of things from a hiring perspective, basically every company, especially larger companies, they usually have a policy where the company will officially never respond to any inquiry about previous employees with anything but confirming the dates they worked and confirming their salary, maybe.
Right, but this isn't. They're not calling my current employer or previous employer, right? They're talking to former coworkers who are now elsewhere.
But that was a problem I used to run into in the earlier days, like the aughts, in that I would not have any contact info for someone I wanted to like use as a reference except their company contact info.
Ah. You know what saved me? Is that at my company, when people leave, there's actually a Slack channel called Arrivals-Celebrations. But so they announce arrivals and celebrations in there, new dog, new baby, new promotion, new hire, right?
Nah.
But also when someone's leaving, right? If they're not let go,
it's a celebration.
And sometimes even if they're let go, right? They go into that channel and make a post like, I'm leaving, it was great working with you, yada, yada, yada. I'm going to miss you guys, etc. And everyone throws a bunch of emojis under it.
Yeah.
And then there's a thread, right? Like, I'll miss you. You were awesome. Good luck, right? But people always put their personal email and phone number in that goodbye post every single time. Which is an indicator they want you to contact them. And I tested that theory, and it's correct. They do want you to contact them when they do that.
Yeah.
If they didn't want you to contact them, they wouldn't put their personal phone number in the Slack of a company they're quitting.
The funny thing is that that whole dynamic, that's actually the only reason I started using LinkedIn, was that replaced having to keep track of the contact info for whoever I happen to work with at a company. I could just
went into the Slack and I typed their name in because their account is still there. It's just deactivated. So.
But also coming out like in this environment after a few years of not seeing people, I look in LinkedIn just to remember like, all right, I just talked to someone online. Let me see if I am supposed to already know who this person is or not. Because
all right, let's move on to some news.
All right, so in some news, it's from a couple weeks ago, and I'm not going to go too deep into the specifics of what Vimeo's doing because you can read this article. It's extremely detailed, but this is not the only platform that is doing this kind of thing. This is a trend. This trend is only going to continue, and it is the kind of thing that affects people like us, people like many of you. A lot of small-time creators don't think that much about these kinds of problems and then get super fucked down the road. Mm-hmm. No platform is immune to this, and basically Vimeo is a place you can host videos. And it's funny because a lot of people see Vimeo as this sort of like, it's the non-YouTube version. Like, I could use YouTube or I could use Vimeo, and they cater to slightly different demographics. But people didn't really pay attention that Vimeo has not seen itself that way for a long time. And what Vimeo... I
don't think it ever saw itself that way.
Yeah. The only people who saw it that way were people who moved to Vimeo to avoid copyright issues on YouTube before Vimeo had any like reasonable way to enforce copyright stuff. So Vimeo is really a platform that you can pay to host video, but it is not a destination for people to go to just watch random videos. It's more like a product, a B2B, business-to-business product for someone who has video they need to host somewhere to host it so that they can build whatever ecosystem they're going to build around that video or incorporating that video.
Yeah.
As opposed to YouTube.
Your own website, and you want to put videos on that website and you don't want to build video hosting infrastructure, right? Which we'll talk about in the main bit, I guess, maybe.
Yep.
You can just pay Vimeo and they'll do that for you, right? I think the number one use of Vimeo these days, it's not the number one use of YouTube, but it is also a use of YouTube, is Patreon. Patreon does not have, unlike all the other like big social type sites, I guess. I don't know if Patreon really falls into those categories, but they don't host their own videos at all. If you make a Patreon and you want to have videos to your patrons, you need to host those videos with Vimeo or YouTube, and that integrates with, embed them in as Patreon posts.
Yep. And they have some good integrations with different platforms, but yeah, and they'll host other things. Like they'll host your images, they'll host your audio. Like there's a mirror
video though.
There's a free mirror version of Geek Nights hosted there, because why not? Why not have it in one more place?
Yep. But they won't do videos. You have to use YouTube or Vimeo in combination with your Patreon. And I think that is one of the most popular uses of Vimeo these days is Patreon video embedding, because you don't want to use YouTube for some reason.
But here's where this is a problem. How is that a good business model for Vimeo if, say, I'm a creator making a podcast like, I don't know, Bleak Nights, and we decide to like do our video and we want to host it somewhere and have a Patreon, and we only let people who pay us on the Patreon see the videos. So we pay Vimeo, we put the videos on Vimeo, and we give access to those videos to people who pay us on Patreon. So now Vimeo as a platform, compared to, say, YouTube with all their ads and nonsense, isn't monetizing my videos. I am paying them for hosting. That is a very different relationship, because I'm making my money from Patreon or whatever other platform I might be using, and this is just a hosting platform. So if I am paying them a small amount because I don't have that many videos and I'm using a lot of bandwidth, I'm just costing Vimeo money. They're getting nothing from me. YouTube...
Video is expensive to host.
But YouTube, meanwhile, the only reason they get away with having that kind of relationship is that even if you're a small-time creator making nothing, if nobody watches your videos, they don't care. And if a ton of people watch your videos, they monetize your videos and take money from your viewers, basically. So
YouTube also is driving views to the video, to the ads, right? To make money. They have that machine running, and your content is really just, fuel for that machine. Vimeo has no such machine. The only way Vimeo can get more money is if the people who are uploading videos pay them more money.
Yep, and what this really seems to come down to is people will pay $200, $300, $400 a year for this service, and Vimeo has started to reach out to a very small number of creators who aren't paying for that much hosting, but represent an extreme or disproportionate number of downloads, a huge amount of bandwidth. Apparently, they only go after you if you are using 3 to 4 terabytes of download a month. Which,
yeah, but I mean, think how much is a popular YouTube channel? It's probably using many terabytes of download a month, right?
Yep. I mean,
someone just got 1 million views. Let me do some math. Let's see. You talk while I do math.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I could even pull up the Geek Night stuff. So we have an average. If I go to the YouTube studio, which I have to open in a window that's not public right here, I gotta click and get to analytics. So let's see. We get an average of about 10,000 views of our videos a month, let's say.
All right, so if you have a 500 a megabyte video, right, which is, a nice chunky MP4, let's say, right, and you have 1 million views, which is a big, a well-viewed video, that's going to be 500 terabytes of download in the 1 million views.
All right, out of my 3.5 terabytes total that I'm allowed to have per month. Okay.
Exactly.
Yep. So you can read this article that talks about all the details and all the changes Vimeo's had. It's very long and thorough, but the moral is very simple. If you are a creator, every platform you use is a risk to you. You cannot assume that platforms will continue to exist in the way you currently use them. The more reliant you are on any platform, any kind of hosting, especially a particular specific provider of that hosting, the more vulnerable you are to them changing anything about that relationship. And if you make a business that assumes things like YouTube and Vimeo exist to be the backbone of your business, you're basically just skimming off of the top of a giant company that might disappear or fuck you over any day. And the real problem here is that there's a huge number of small-time creators, which is cool. Like, that's a fun, exciting thing, who they complain that they can't monetize their content, but their content doesn't get that many views anyway. There's this huge class of content creators who basically just cost platforms money. And at some point, that ecosystem's going to break. And I think a lot of platforms are going to start cutting off small providers or small content creators, or heavily limiting how much small content creators can use those platforms without either paying or being monetizable by those platforms.
Yep. It's like, hey, I got videos on Vimeo. Please, Vimeo, don't shut down my account. Well, and Vimeo's like, well, give us money. No. Okay, we'll keep hosting you for the small amount of money. Oh, we went out of business. Everyone's videos are gone. That's a shame. Right?
Yep.
Like, what other outcome were you expecting?
Well, this also applies to people who get mad that, like, YouTube won't let them monetize unless they have a certain number of views or certain number of hours watched or certain number of subscribers. But those people seem to forget that if you're below those, honestly, extremely low thresholds, Twitch is included in this too, like any platform. Even if they let you monetize, you're going to be making like dozens of cents a month. Like, you're not going to make enough money to make a difference in your life. I'm not sure what
it's going to cost them more money. And if they did that for everyone, they'd go out of business and everyone's videos would be gone.
Yep. What you're actually complaining about is, why won't capitalism pay you to do what you love? And yeah, guess what?
Yeah.
GeekNights does not fund my life. GeekNights is profitable if you don't count the labor that me and Scott spend on GeekNights.
Don't be mad at Vimeo and YouTube about this. Be mad at capitalism and, support public funding of the arts.
Yep.
And then you'll just get money from the government. And then you won't have to fight with,
Don't even be mad at Adam Smith. That form of capitalism assumes things like living wages and reasonable hours. Be mad at, like, the actual capitalism that we actually have in the real world.
All right, let's move on. We're dragging a bit here.
Yeah, we are.
So, speaking of capitalism and internet platforms, Twitch has, I think we talked about this when it was first in news. I don't remember, but I think we did. But
we had to have. I was mad about it.
They got a feature where you can basically pay to get your Twitch stream boosted up to the front page. So, like, I guess your Twitch viewers would start boosting you and get a hype train going, get a boost train or whatever, and that would get your stream onto the front page of Twitch, which would then help you out even more.
Which, all I got to say, that whole ecosystem, if in case we didn't say it when we did a show before, that reeks of how timeshares get monetized, in that they distance what the money is being used for and what you're actually paying for from the results of that money, and they're basically tricking fans of someone else into paying them to promote you. It's ridiculous.
Anyway, so what happened is some genius started streaming some porn because, even though it's against the Twitch terms of service, it's hard to police live streams, and they can't, they had to find it first. You can stream porn on Twitch and get away with it for a little while, right? Until it's detected.
Yeah.
And then they boosted that shit right to the front page, and then shut down. So, but not before everyone noticed. And that's funny. And now, as a result, Twitch removed this feature.
Thankfully.
Yeah, because, but also, I guess whoever did this just gave Amazon a bunch of free money. Right? But
that's, there's so much buried beneath. Like, the story itself is interesting, but the just sheer toxic nature of how Twitch monetizes the desire for fame among the people who use Twitch is increasingly bothering me. And this is just a very strong example of that.
Yeah.
But also, it was a very poorly thought out feature. Twitch seems to have a recent history of features that, as soon as they go live, immediately cause all the harms that everyone saw coming a mile away before they had launched it.
Yeah. I guess what is interesting is that, Twitch, in this case, actually acted counter to capitalism, right? This is an example of where, moderating, by, cracking down on these things, they're actually, costing themselves money, right? But they went ahead and did it anyway, right? It's like they could have just let this go and they would have made piles and piles of more money from people doing all sorts of, bad stuff with this feature. Instead, they turned the feature off.
Well, they're also getting a lot of flack from basically people who are already traditionally marginalized by people would pay to promote them to the front page, and then harassment brigades would see them and go after them all sorts of bad outcomes that were all perfectly obvious from long before this feature went live.
Anyway, so that happened.
Yep. I guess you want to talk about the Amazon chat app?
Oh yeah, so I just talked about Slack, right? Which I think every company uses. Even Apple has Slack, and right, which is really weird to me.
Even my company uses it for some teams, but I don't use it for anything.
Anyway, but yeah, so Amazon apparently is trying to make their own Slack, an internal employee chat app, and for specifically for Amazon, not for the public, right? They're not going to go compete with Slack. At least there's no news of that yet. They're just they want the Amazon employees to use a chat app that is not Slack, that is the Amazon employee chat app, right?
And that they've apparently said is designed to, quote, boost happiness.
Yeah, sure. The what's making the headlines is supposedly there was some document leakage that may or may not be true or something like that, but that many words are banned for use in the chat app, like you can't say union on it and such.
Yep.
Right?
Ethics, robots, bathroom.
Yeah. So who knows if that's true or not, but it, does raise a specter of, if your company's chat app, or internal communication systems, forget if, right? They are controlled by the company. Even if you use Slack, your company could always make a Slack plugin that's monitoring everything everyone says, even in the private chats.
Were I trying to say unionize a workplace I was in, I would not use anything the company provided under any circumstances.
Exactly. So just, it's like a reminder, whether this is how much truth there is in this story, that Amazon is foolishly anti-union. They spent millions of dollars trying to fight unions, and Staten Island unioned anyway. The money they spent fighting the union, they could have just given that money to the employees and they wouldn't have made a union because their salaries would have been so much higher.
Or they could have given the salaries, they would have made a union anyway, and everyone would have been better off.
Yeah, but regardless, internal company chat apps are you use them for your work and, completely safe chit chats, don't use them for anything else, especially not trying to unionize the workplace that controls the chat app.
Yep. But also, it sounds so dystopian. They outlined that the app would encourage, quote, shout outs and offer digital rewards for providing value to the company. Yeah, digital rewards. Why not just give them money?
Because digital rewards don't cost anything.
All right, I think we can go to the things of the day and such from there. Stick a little marker. But anyway, things of the day. So check this out. If you use Blender for 3D modeling and such, there is a plugin for Blender. What that plugin does, it's called Fast64. It basically lets you make and export assets that could be used directly in games that use the Mario 64 / Ocarina of Time engine. So you can make assets to use in your N64 game that you're making. If that's something you're trying to do.
Very nice.
Yeah, that's a cool thing. That's not my thing of the day. That's just cool. So because of this, if you're making levels in Blender that you intend to use with this engine, or maybe not, and you're using this plugin, then the plugin also gives you the ability to drop a little Mario directly into Blender and have him just be fully controllable and jump around whatever it is you've got open right now in Blender.
Is this plugin a commercial product that you...
No, just free.
Okay. I was going to say, because Nintendo would come after them for using a Mario and not
it's
a generic dude.
Yep, it's just free. I think you might need to have the asset pack to make it work. I didn't dig too close into it.
Okay.
But
That makes sense.
that's not hard. That's like in the old Doom days where you get the fake wad, you replace it with the real wad.
So basically, you can make any 3D environment and make a Mario jump around it.
Exactly. And all the other Blender stuff, like voxel remeshing, just works on the Mario. So
yeah, it won't work when you load that into an N64.
Oh, no. You can make some really slick-looking Marios that could never run on N64 hardware.
Yeah.
But yeah, make a 3D model and just drop Mario in, and he's just there, fully functional.
So everyone knows emulators, right? You know, you can run software meant for another computer on a different computer, right? Or a different platform, get an NES game to run on a PC, etc. And most of the time it's used for, you know, video games and whatnot, where it's just a single ROM, right? You know, but, you know, it's a lot more complicated to emulate a computer, especially a computer that has, you know, like multiprocessing, right? You know, because you got to like set up the OS, and you get, you know, usually use virtual machines to do that sort of thing, and not emulators. And particularly complicated is when the architecture of the system you're trying to emulate is so vastly different from your local architecture. But somehow, some nerds got Mac OS 7 and 8 to run emulated in a web browser. And they set it up for you.
To someone who grew up in the late 1900s, this is amazing.
Yeah, and they set it up with all kinds of software pre-installed and pre-configured, and you could even make you could open up Photoshop 3.0, draw a picture, drag it, and then it'll download in your browser. It'll act like you downloaded a file, and then you could have that file. I made a JPEG, and I downloaded it, and sure enough, I had the JPEG in my Windows that I drew in Firefox, in a Mac, in Photoshop 3. I got the JPEG to come out. I could have uploaded that JPEG to, like, you know, my own website or the GeekNights Discord or whatever. So
I'm not connected to Apple Talk, so I can't use Apple Share.
Yeah, you can't use that. But yeah, if you've never used a computer running, you know, Mac OS 7 or 8, the 7 one works the best, I think. If you haven't, you know, had that experience, you know what it's like. I highly recommend just going to this website, and you can mess around a whole lot with Mac OS 7 and see what it was like. Because, you know, the only people who used it were like big Mac nerds.
I mean, I've definitely...
Everyone else had like Windows 95 and shit.
I've never used it in my life. I used DOS 6 something, Windows 3.1, Windows 3.1.1, all the Windowses except Millennium after that, and OS 2 Warp.
I used them at school, and we had one friend who had Mac OS 9, right? 8.9, so...
I did have a laptop when I worked at IBM. It was a 386, and it ran a local semi-proprietary operating system.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right. In the meta moment, the Geek Nights Book Club book, which we will be doing not this week on Thursday, but next week on Thursday, the 14th, The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. What a Geek Nights Book Club book this is.
Did you finish it?
Not yet, but nearly so.
Okay, I finished the thing like so fast.
I didn't read it while I had COVID. I just slept.
All right. Anyway, any other meta things? PAX East is coming.
Yep, I will be there on the Thursday. Thursday.
COVID to PAX East.
I mean, the 21st. Actually, my work is weirdly wants me to come in as early as this coming Friday, even though I'm like still slightly symptomatic.
Uh-oh.
They just don't get. No one cares anymore.
Well.
But Thursday, April 21st, the only day I will be at PAX, much like Unplugged. I'm going to roll in a mask, do the panel, and roll right back out.
Mm-hmm.
And if you
go to that, sit in the back.
If you are going to be there, like, come on in. It'll be fun. Don't go to PAX East just to see this panel if you're not already going, because just like with Unplugged, I guarantee to you, video of this panel will be on YouTube before PAX East is over.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rock fact.
Okay, good.
All right, and I guess
that's all the meta we got. Working on I worked a whole bunch on the website, and it's weird because I made a ton of progress, but all that I did, I'm overbuilding it, right? I built some enormous thing to fully support like the ultimate every RSS spec for podcasts.
I've never regretted overbuilding anything in my life, and I've regretted many times when I underbuilt something.
And I wrote like 200 lines of tests to make sure the XML is like correct. And
yeah.
It's like, you know, so it's like I made a lot of progress, but what did I really make? A RSS feed. That's it. We got move on to the next part, right?
It's exciting though.
Working on it.
It's this coincides with slowly ramping up content and fun stuff again.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right.
Main bit, hosting, right? So in the year 2006, if you wanted to host, you know, web services or internet services, right, there were ways you could go about this. Way number one was to, there wasn't like Oz and these cloud hosts weren't really a thing then. I guess maybe they kind of existed, sort of. When did EC2 come out?
That's what I was just looking up. EC2, initial release, August 25th, 2006. So months after we did this episode, Amazon EC2 launched. Think about that for a minute.
Yeah. So, in those days, the way you could host internet services was to own a data center with hardware in it.
Yep.
Co-locate your own hardware into an existing data center. Somehow have a static IP address and then your own hardware in your house or some shit.
Which I weirdly did in high school in the 90s because...
college when you had a static IP address? Yeah.
I had a static IP in high school because of the extremely early cable modem network I was on.
Yep. Use dynamic DNS. There's a couple ways of doing dynamic DNS. None of them are amazing, but they kind of can work if you do them right.
Yep.
Sort of. And your IP address changes at your house, but you still have a server at your house, and it still mostly works all the time, because you did it right. And the last way was to pay for hosting, so someone else has a server, and they let you use it, right? So, and that means either A, you're like you're FTPing files into a folder on the server, and they're running services on the server that you're then using, like MySQL database, or Apache with mod PHP or something like that. Or it's effectively the same as co-locating. You just don't own the hardware, but you're just renting hardware that's in a data center. Or they're running virtual machines on hardware in a data center. So
now this was a long time ago. Virtualization was quite different from how it is today.
Right. So you can still get VPCs today, which is still what I use a lot of the time. But the way those were implemented in those days was like using Zen or things like that are not used anymore. That's the very old way of doing it. But regardless, one big piece of hardware running effectively many virtual computers inside of it, one of which belongs to you.
Yep. Right? But the fundamental unit was either a computer with a full-ass operating system that you can just use as a computer, run it, like install Apache, run Apache, do stuff with Apache. It's just like a computer in your house. Or someone else is running it like that.
Server.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or someone else is running it like that, and they give you limited access to it. That was pretty much it. Like unless you were inside.
There was one more option, which was the GeoCities style option, where you do like as LiveJournal or something like that, right?
Well, content hosting. Pure content hosting.
It's like you want to host something specific, and there's somebody who hosts that specific thing. Counter-Strike server, blog, right?
That did exist back then. There were a bunch of platforms that did that kind of thing. They were just extremely limited. And a big part of why we talked about hosting back in 2006 was that we wanted to do a podcast. Back then, there weren't even really like many dedicated podcasting services. Pretty much had to run a real Linux server in the sky to make Geek Nights happen.
Anyway, so what has changed since then? Well, the first thing that's changed, obviously, is the introduction of the cloud providers, right? Amazon, obviously, the biggest one, but you got your Azure, your Google Cloud, and some other competitors out there that are smaller. Those are the big three, basically. And the deal with them is that it's not just data center host a machine. It's like every function of the data center is turned into like a different parceled out specific service. And you sort of have to orchestrate and architect a system that, incorporates all those different pieces together.
Now that is relatively new over the last 5 to 8 years, in that earlier, like how we would have talked about EC2 or cloud servers back then until relatively recently, it's a server virtualized as far as you're concerned with an operating system. You're still installing software into that operating system. It just happens to itself be virtualized at scale by another company. But then, as Scott pointed out, this ecosystem expanded where, like, Amazon's a good example. Bit by bit, they're like, oh, hey, we have a DNS service you can use that's cloud native. We have a networking service, a firewall, a load balancer, and they kept a middleware, enterprise service bus. They kept adding cloud native services that you could run headless. They didn't need a server running Linux or Windows or something. They were just a service endpoint you could leverage. You could make a website where there's no actual EC2 instance at any point if you wanted to today.
Yep. A very popular architecture on Oz specifically is to use API gateway backed by lambdas, right?
Yep.
So someone will make an API call, and this lambda that only does one thing will spin up, run one thing, spit out the JSON response, and go back to sleep.
So if 1,000 people hit your service at the same time, 1,000 lambdas spin up, and each one handles one of those requests completely independently of each other.
Depending on your settings.
Yeah, depending on what you do with it, obviously. But
right. So the reason that the reason this is like so fascinating, from a technological perspective, is that basically at the Amazon data center, it's like they've just got tons of storage, tons of hardware, right, all over the place, and the cloud service is actually like this abstraction layer on top of it, and there's this, middle stuff that you don't get to see unless you work there. So I don't fully know how most of it works. I know some parts I've read about, but it's like they're basically, parceling everything out and getting like incredible efficiency, right? It's not like, oh, some guy rented this whole server and he's got Apache running on it, and when nobody's visiting his website, this hardware is just sitting there doing nothing.
Yep.
That doesn't happen, right? It's like, 100 people all have API gateways configured. Well, there's really just this one big API gateway service that's like handling all those API gateways all the time, right? And so it's constantly, being used efficiently, right? Nothing's really, there isn't a lot of hardware just taking a nap over there, wasting away.
Yep. The exception to that is any of the like cloud or virtualized hosting that's used for either legacy types of applications that still expect there to be an operating system or expect to be running all the time.
Yeah.
Or
each cloud service is going to be different, right?
Yeah. Or honestly, things like game servers, things that just are always on, constantly processing.
Yep. But yeah, so you use these things, and like from your perspective as a user, it feels like you're using these services based on the abstractions they present to you, but what's actually happening behind them, they know, right? It's like, but it works. The problem with this is that in terms of hosting, as just a person who wants to host some internet services, just some servers, web, email, whatever, you have to need a vast amount of technological knowledge and not just technological knowledge in general, but then on top of that, specific knowledge of the cloud provider you're using and how they do things. In order to make this work, you can't, Amazon actually specifically has a thing called light sail, which is like push a button and we'll make a WordPress for you on Oz, or we'll make they have a list of, of things that you can light sail and get basically push button to spin them up. But it still takes some technological knowing, and costing money and whatnot. So, but if you're a company, it's basically the way to go these days, right? Kinda.
Well, depending, because, kind of like we talked about in that Vimeo news, if you build something that is proprietary to or assumes the use of a specific cloud platform, your thing is now locked to that cloud platform. Which means if Amazon changes anything, you have to deal with it. Like, you can't just take your business elsewhere, at least not easily, unless you've been extremely careful about your architecture. And multi-cloud architectures that are actually fungible, still very difficult to put together for anything non-trivial.
Yeah. My policy, I don't know about my employer, they can have whatever policy they want. That's on them, right? But my personal policy is that when using a cloud service, I will stick to the services that are, basically standards based. So like if you use Amazon RDS Postgres, it's like if you have to leave Amazon, you can just spin up a Postgres server and it's the same, right? But if you use Amazon, Redshift, I don't even know what the hell that thing does. I just heard it's just one I thought of, right? Is like, I don't think that's just like a hosted version of an open source project. I think that's an Amazon specific thing, right? So if your application was dependent on that, you couldn't just easily spin your own up at home, right? You use Amazon Lambdas. It's like it's like, well, how are you gonna host those yourself? you can't, right? It's like you have to do something, right? So I personally will only use the services in the cloud that are just free open source things that just happen to be hosted. And if I had to leave that cloud environment, I could easily mimic it and get my application up and running again because I'm only using standard pieces.
Yep. And thus it comes down to way more than in 2006. You really just have to think about specifically, what are you trying to host and why? And the answer to what kind of hosting to use and how to use it could be so radically different based on that answer that it's like, it's almost impossible to give advice that's broad that will work for you. Like you almost have to
you have to know someone's situation, right? How much money they have, what their needs are, what their technological skills and knowledge are, how much time they have. You know, how different is what they're doing from something normal and boring.
But this is where we see the rise of, because there's blank as a service, like something as. That's the big buzzword in the entire tech world, has been for some time now. That's the business I'm in. And platform as a service is extremely popular for hosting because most people are not like us, where they have all these different services they're trying to like cobble something together with. They're not running a complex online application that's doing something. They're not hosting the infrastructure for an app or a big game. Usually people are trying to follow a small number of simple patterns, mostly around sharing content. Usually video content, blogs, articles, like really simple stuff. That's what most people want to host when they talk about hosting. So you pay for a platform like Vimeo that will host.
Vimeo's not platform as a service. Vimeo is software as a service.
True. Well, Vimeo is, arguably Vimeo is video hosting as a service.
Sure, but it's, the two categories, the software as a service and platform as a service, right? So what's the difference? The difference is that software as a service is already the software that you want to be running, right? So a good example would be WordPress.com is software as a service, the software being WordPress, right? So rather than host your own WordPress blog somehow, some way, there's 100 ways to do it, right? You pay them and they run WordPress for you, right? Squarespace is software as a service, right? Various podcast hosts out there are software as a service. They've got some sort of podcast delivery thing they're running for you, right? Platform as a service would be something like Heroku, if you've ever heard of that, right? So Heroku is you write your software, right? You wrote a program in Ruby on Rails or Django or you wrote some application that you need to host somewhere. But you don't want to administer servers, right? You don't even want to do colocation or VPC or cloud or anything. You just wrote a simple application and you wrote that application within this framework, right? And you send it to them in the format that they want you to send it to them. And then they can run that on their platform. So you provide the software and they provide the platform, and you don't have to worry about any administration or, hosting technology or networking or anything, all that stuff you don't have to worry about. You can just write the software and that's it.
Yep. And like you don't know like if there even is an operating system behind all of this. You might never even see it.
That's platform as a service, and that's very popular these days because, a lot of people, especially with like Node.js and stuff, a lot of people can write a web application in JavaScript entirely, however simple it is, and then just get it running without having to learn anything or do anything. And the cost of platform as a service is that you pay more money for those. Platform as a service costs a lot more over time than hosting your own machine. And the balance of that is you don't have to learn or do you save a lot of time and knowledge, right?
Yep, and you might also be taking advantage of some scaling factor that, you're probably smaller than the company you're paying for this from.
Yep. So the software as a service, though, right? It existed back in the day, 2006, in terms of, like I talked about, the GeoCities.
But there just weren't many options. They weren't that good. Like WordPress wasn't even like that extensible or great back then.
Yeah, but nowadays the software as a service options are enormous. There are tons of them covering like every possible conceivable thing. For a lot of companies, especially, but also individuals, it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless your business is truly doing something unusual that requires custom software. There isn't really reason to hire engineers, maybe a couple. You could just pay for software as a service products and connect them together. And then there are even other software as a service products you can get that will connect other software service products together. Like, oh, I got my Slack and I got my Salesforce and I want to connect them together, right? Well, guess what? There's another software as a service that does Slack Salesforce connections. It's like, you can just keep buying these things, get Airtables and all sorts of things out there and run your whole, operation that way. And frankly, if you're not doing anything out of the ordinary, that's the right move for basically any company that's not a tech company, for a large part of it anyway. And I think what's happened is, people having trouble hiring engineers. It's like, why? All the engineers are working at software as a service places, making the software. And, all the other companies are just buying that software rather than hiring engineers. And with an engineer shortage, it actually makes sense. It's one of those cases where capitalism is kind of making things more efficient a little bit, right? One engineer makes one software product that many companies use rather than 10 companies all building 10 similar things, right?
Yep. Well, similar to how once EC2 was stable for a long time, like if I needed a new server to do anything, even just my own personal stuff, I would just spin up an EC2 instance with like Linux installed on it and just run stuff on it. I used to have like 6 or 7 different EC2 servers doing stuff I needed. And that's the kind of workflow that's kind of obsolete by modern standards in most cases, unless you're a hobbyist or you're doing something very bespoke.
Yeah. So, with all that stuff going on in the realm of hosting, there's been, a downturn, right? So all this new stuff, what's gone away, not completely, it still exists, but is that sort of hosting where you just get an FTP and drop stuff in a folder, right? There are still people providing it, but they're very few and they're mostly all garbage. They're not doing a good job of it.
I feel like a lot of them just have hardware that is still hosted that might even be a little old, and they're just running something that's been around for a while.
Yeah. So this is a problem because I think for even with those platforms as a service, for a lot of people, it's like that's too much for them. That requires writing software, right? A lot of people just like, they want to host some static HTML blog or something, or maybe, a little PHP blog or something, right? And they've been doing this by just dropping files into a directory. And if you don't have, it's like anything else is like the technical skills required to do any other kind of hosting is an enormous leap, right? There isn't some other easy hosting option out there. It's pretty much you go straight from Squarespace, the software as a service, and you jump all the way to platform as a service is like the next easiest thing, right? And it's like that space in between in terms of technical know-how is completely unoccupied.
Well, I would argue that place in between. So one of the areas I work with a lot in my space, at least in like my day job, is infrastructure as a service, as sort of bridging the gap between platform and just nothing. And so
that's harder. That's harder to do technical skill wise than platform as a service.
Yep. But think of it more like where I've seen infrastructure as a service is more like you're running everything however you're running it, but you've outsourced specific, extremely generic pieces of it to a platform somewhere, like just the storage, just the video streaming,
but
just your
network
network.
Providers offer, right? S3, that takes technological know-how to use an S3 compared to, right? It's,
Well, I remember when
how much technical skill do you need to use it, right?
Well, for example, I advise someone.
None. How much do you need to use Heroku? You have to be able to write software, right?
Yep. Well, like years ago.
Know nothing and and ability to write software.
Well, so here's an example. Amazon Glacier. I suggested many years ago that someone else use Amazon Glacier just to, do a backup, because that's what I use.
It requires technical know-how to use.
It does. There's no UI of like drag files into Glacier. You've got to write some code, get that token, and do some stuff. So my Synology is like integrated with this infrastructure that I'm using solely for storage, but I'm doing everything except the heavy lifting of the raw data storage itself. I'm doing everything except that one piece, and I'm paying Amazon like $30 a month to do that one piece.
Technological know-how, that's hard to do. That's not.
It is.
It's not an easy, right? It's much harder than drag your files with an FTP, and now you have a website that's has PHP going and such.
Yep. Right? Never mind, like with that software, like if you run WordPress yourself, however you run it, are you keeping it up to date?
Yep. And so what the result of that is that there are the people who don't have a lot of technological skill, right, are forced to either A, only use free platforms to put their stuff online, right? Social media, Twitters, Facebooks,
Yep.
right? Or pay for software as a services, Squarespaces, Vimeos, right? And that's what they're stuck with. And people who have technological skill can host very, very complex and fancy, amazing things at relatively low cost, but still a cost of money, right? That sort of, balances out, right? And then that in-between space where only want to pay a little bit of money, what, $5 a month, right? Maybe less than that, and host something kind of, different. I want to host an IRC server, right? I want to host a Jabber server. I want to host a custom website and not just some, like actually a custom website that I wrote all the HTML myself, whatever. It's like, that's sort of, it technically still exists, but it's like not really anymore. And it's like this unoccupied space, and people who land in that space are poorly served, right? They either have to give up their customization and use the same platforms everyone else uses and pay money, or learn a lot of technological stuff they don't have time for, or pay a lot of money to hire someone who does know technological stuff.
Yep. Like a really big example of that, especially because it's dying as companies start to just host this themselves. Custom game servers. You like a game, it's an online game, you want to run your own server. There are some providers who, for individual specific games, they will actually give you like basically virtualized software as a service for hosting like a Counter-Strike server specifically.
Yep.
But that's highly specialized. You want to run some other game other than Counter-Strike? That doesn't exist. You want a pit boss?
I've seen it around. Usually the game hosting places I've seen these days, they all seem shady, but they tend
They
to
usually have a list of games that they have like built-in support for.
You can choose from, yeah. But what's happened though is that we've gotten away from that, right? It's like now it's like you don't host a server for most games. The company does.
Yeah.
Right? The company that makes the game hosts it.
If I want to make a custom server in Overwatch, I click in the menu in Overwatch and I spawn a server on Blizzard servers somewhere.
Right. You can't run your own Overwatch server on your own hardware. They don't let you do that.
Yep.
Maybe they have deals with like the Overwatch League teams to let them do it locally or something, but yeah.
Yep. Not like we used to run a Counter-Strike server on a physical server that was just sitting on the floor in our apartment at our IT.
Exactly. You can't do that with new games. They don't let you.
So if you want to do something that other people do with such frequency that someone has a very specific software as a service platform that just does what you want, pretty much that's your best bet. And if you want to
have money,
if you don't have money, you're basically just screwed, or you have to use services that will monetize your content instead of you monetizing it. You're going to be using social media.
Host all the videos you want on TikTok.
Yeah, or YouTube.
Right? No one's going to stop you.
Unless they're copyright violating or whatever, but
right. Yeah.
Or depending on I guess TikTok has
streaming you want on Twitch and YouTube and
Yep.
Facebook. Right?
But that's it. We're seeing increasingly people like streaming video is extremely popular, and also it's too expensive to actually provide that at scale for all the people who want to do it. So we have all these we have Twitch and YouTube and these platforms that each have their own way of monetizing very specific ways video is used online, and you can't really step outside of those boundaries, or there's almost no viable option other than going bespoke and spending tons of money.
Know-how and or money, right, to escape from that.
Yeah. So it's interesting how the technology's gotten better, and if you're doing something basic, hosting is way easier than it ever was. But I would argue, and I think it's almost harder to do anything that's not a standard capitalist-supported thing online than it used to be in 2006.
Yeah, one technique I did learn recently was to use a tunnel. I haven't tried this yet, but basically, host your server in your house and then use a tunnel to the cloud provider, like Cloudflare or Amazon.
Yep.
Right? And then all traffic coming to your service that's running on a server in your house has to go through that tunnel, and that protects your house from like being directly hit with network traffic, right? Protects your server, and it protects, right? No, the cloud provider can't like mess with your server or anything, right? Because it's in your house still, right? But you can basically get the bandwidth from them that way with the tunnel, and that's not a bad model. It also solves the dynamic DNS problem because all the DNS is pointing at the IP address in the cloud, and it's reaching your house through a tunnel and not really your.
Though you still need enough bandwidth to handle all the client requests between you and the provider.
You could put a CDN out there, right? You could do all sorts of stuff. But yeah, you are going to need enough bandwidth at your house. That's
yep. Or deploying a CDN. All right, sure. But not we're the kind of people who know how to do that.
Yeah. I'm just saying there is still that option now. I didn't realize that till like this week that the tunnel could be used in that way to still host from the house, right? But technological know-how.
Yep.
But it would save you money, especially like, Cloudflare. They got, we can discuss Cloudflare good and bad at another time, but they're offering free tunnels within limits. So
I think it's partly because most of what the areas that people have struggled with the most right now are things where there are fixed costs or costs that don't exist in a retail consumer world. Like bandwidth at scale isn't cheap if you actually want to do something like a host video. Game servers often require a ton of local CPU on the servers to run because they're real time they're not real time like a real time system, but they're human pseudo real time. They need to be running and responsive and active with low latency.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to do that. It's even harder to do that now, and it's definitely harder to do that at scale than it was in 2006, partly because the scales were a lot lower back then.
Yep. So yeah, providing internet services in 2022 is a lot harder than 2006. It takes technological skill and or money, and it's kind of a shame. And I suggest, obviously personally, I suggest learning the technological skills so that you can do it and avoid spending the money.
Yep.
Right.
Or partner with someone who has that. Like Scott and I split up the duties of Geek Nights. We both don't do everything because there's too much to do, even for just a podcast with some streams and videos and associated content.
Yep. All right. I'm going to go do food.
I'm also going to go do food.
All right, bye.
And stream.